Hello, and welcome back to From the Ground Up, a public policy podcast at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. Earlier this month, we hosted an event called Cyber Infrastructure in Critical Industries. It was a super big hit, and our very own Dapo moderated the event. Dapo, do you want to tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, Logan, it was a pleasure to host the event. We were lucky to have Kevin Sanschaffer, Amala Lee, Rob Labbe, and Dylan Hope. Kevin Sanschaffer is a risk management professional with over 20 years of experience within the insurance and financial industries. His areas of expertise include information security, business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management, governance, risk management, and compliance. He currently serves as the COO and VP of Cyber Risk and Assurance at WhiteTuque. Amala Lee is a national security professional with experience in SIGINT, special operations, congressional affairs, and private consulting. She serves as the managing director of Elysium Strategy Group. Elysium Strategy Group specializes in leveraging commercial diplomacy to forge robust and resilient business partnerships between African firms and burgeoning African markets. Rob Labbe is the CEO of Mining and Metals ISAC. He's a proven focused security and business leader. He's currently focused on proactive security policy, processes, and tools to use security to help enable business outcomes. He specializes in development of integrated IT OT security programs. The Mining and Metals ISAC is a nonprofit industry-owned corporation established to improve the cybersecurity of metals and mining companies. Dylan Hope serves as a Veterans and Military Liaison to U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth, who serves on the Senate Arms Committee and Subcommittee for Cybersecurity. Dylan is currently serving in the Illinois Army National Guard. He completed combat deployment in 2022, and he's also a former operations chief and public affairs specialist.
Great, thank you for that. And also just a big shout out to Harris Tech, UC3P, of course, and MASH for co-sponsoring this event with us. Now, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and play the event.
So for a minute or two, I just want everyone to say something about the work they do. You know, what's interesting, what you wish that someone who is not doing the work you do should know about the industry. So I'm going to start with Dylan.
So yeah, just wanted to, I think to answer your question, what I'd like to see going forward. Well, right now I think we're making big strides. Speaking on behalf of the senator, we have the White House Office of National Cyber Director stood up in 2021, and that was established to ensure that we're advancing our national security and prosperity with using innovative cybersecurity policy. And so I know that if you haven't checked out the Biden-Harris administration national cybersecurity strategy, I recommend you do so, and you can kind of see the path forward as far as steps we need to take to, maybe not necessarily catch up, but succeed going forward in regards to our cybersecurity. So yeah, if you haven't checked out the cybersecurity policy, I'd also recommend you check out the ONCD, the Office of the National Cyber Director.
All right, thank you. Amal.
Hi, first of all, this is a great conversation. Thank you so much. So one of the things that I focus on is my angle into this industry is not just mining. It's not just the mineral side of it. It's national security first and foremost, and our relations with other countries when it comes to securing a lot of these critical minerals. And I think it was Rob that may have said it, but it was elevating mining here domestically and internationally to a critical infrastructure. It really is, and it really should be considered a critical infrastructure across the board. So that's one thing that I hope that, if you get anything out of this, it's that it's critical to our day of life, to our way of life. The other part is the not often talked about, at least maybe in this sphere, but supply chain security. From the raw material to usable material, there's a lot of nodes, there's a lot of opportunity for vulnerability there. And cybersecurity plus physical security plus human security and just the holistic approach to security is very important here. And we really don't have enough professionals in the field to really look at that problem set. Right now, when we think of cybersecurity, we're looking at networks, we're looking at computers and financial systems. While those are also very, very, very important, I think that extending the same level of consideration and care towards mining, I think, is a human issue at this point. So those two, and just to kind of give Dylan, Senator Duckworth is one of the most amazing people in the field right now. I'm also a veteran, so I have tremendous respect for the deep understanding and consideration that she's given to cybersecurity writ large and the importance and the role that it plays in domestic and foreign policy. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. So, today, it's really about helping individual businesses for me, moving into consulting from the, international finance world. It's really about understanding how different types of businesses within different industries attack different problems. And, every business has a different method to their madness, how they deliver their services, who their consumers are, things along those lines. And it's very interesting as a learning experience for me to see, what are they dealing with on a day-to-day basis and how I can help them identify, true risks in their environment. And then something in my past that, I relatively enjoyed, even though it was somewhat taxing, was working with the Canadian Financial Resiliency Group. It's basically a conglomerate of the 5 major banking institutions in Canada, and helping them think through, how are they conducting, information sharing, and how are they going to really react if there is a major impact to either one of them directly, or maybe the core financial system, wire system, SWIFT, or Interact, or one of the other systems that they rely on to move money, or even a material correspondent bank, that they're all, moving potentially Canadian dollars from Canada to Europe. And if there's an impact with one of those banks that they're relying on, how are they reacting? How are they sharing information? What are they doing? And how are they working with the federal regulators to, mitigate as much risk as possible? So those are 2 things that I've, recently enjoyed working on.
Thank you. How about you, Rob? What do you, wish people knew about the work that you do?
Yeah, I think, looking back, what drew me to mining a decade ago from financial services is really 2 things. Number one is the criticality of mining, as Emil says, to national security and global supply chains, right? It's not a stretch to say, everything starts from one of 2 places. It's grown or it's mined, right? And there are no iPhone trees. So the amount of rock that has to move to produce one iPhone, right, is in the dozens of tons of rock has to move to create that one phone. So looking at that criticality, combined with the challenge, as Emil said, of legacy systems, even in the US, it's not uncommon to find Windows XP, even versions of Windows that might have been created before some of the students might have been using computers, including Windows 3.1.1, that we still find in mines in North America, let alone in Africa. So, and that's just because of the challenge of legacy systems across the board. Combine that with, let's blend that with AI and machine learning, creates a super exciting space to work in, a really interesting space, but a lot of difficult problems to think through. And I think Kevin's focus is the right one. It's got to be on resiliency, because you're going to miss something is going to happen, but we have to reduce the blast radius. We have to not allow that something that happens, one person clicking on something we wish they wouldn't have, to become a major outage. And that's really the focus, I think, for the mining industry globally right now. And our organization is helping mining companies reduce that blast radius. So if something happens, we don't have the material impact. And I think that's key.
All right, thank you. So to Rob Labbe, about 6 to 7 years ago, you helped found the Mining and Metals ISAC. And the goal was to help, mining companies deal with the cybersecurity issues a little bit more. a little better. And I just wanted to ask, what are your advocacy group's key concerns regarding the current state of cybersecurity in the metals and mining industry?
So the big concerns really when we look at it right now are two things. It's when we look at the overall, direction we're trying to go, changing our economy to being a low carbon one, the need for more electrification to support that, mining is becoming more critical and not really just in the, the lithiums and the cobalts needed for batteries, but in some of the old materials like copper that's needed to increase our electrical generation and transmission capability. So a lot of that is becoming more critical to our economy, which, as you said, is drawing the attention of attackers. At the same time, the speed that the mining industry is transforming has meant that our attack surface is changing, is getting much more complex. So getting with those combined, building our industry to be more resilient to attacks, so we don't get situations like we saw happen with MGM casinos, where the whole business gets shut down because of an incident. That kind of thing can be crippling in mining much beyond the company involved as it cascades through the supply chain. So it's a big issue given where mining sits in the supply chain.
Thank you for that. And Amal, as someone who works in a consulting firm, are you seeing the same types of issues in the companies that you work with?
Great question in terms of cybersecurity being relevant in the mining industry. What you're finding nowadays, in addition to cyber threats being a real threat, is state-sponsored groups are also developing sophisticated capabilities to target our critical infrastructure. So overseas in African countries, you have a preponderance of adversarial presence or economic adversaries, to include but not limited to China, who is, making a concerted effort to counter, if not undermine, our efforts there. So yeah, I would say that is a very present and, I guess, growing problem in the region.
All right, thank you. And Kevin, so given these problems that we have trying to, reduce the effects of these bad actors on the mining industry, what technological advancement would you recommend that, we need to see over the coming decade, over the next few years, that might help to reduce some of these risks?
When I think about technology, everything's moving so quickly. The first thing organizations really need to understand is, what assets are at risk. What's really supporting their core service offerings. Because until you really identify those, it's impossible for you to protect what you, again, can't see. So starting with that and really understanding your network and what your business is supporting and how they conduct business and how information is moving and how it is controlling certain components of your services is really the first step. And then I think taking a look at, understanding the vulnerabilities of your organization. So managing those risks and adapting the existing technologies in place are a first step. So taking an understanding of, what are we doing well, but maybe again, if you can't see something, you can't protect it, adapting those technologies to make sure that those protective controls are in place, again, when feasible. I'm also a big advocate of, proactively assessing your defense capabilities through penetration testing, purple team testing. These are always good ways to identify issues and ensure your response teams are prepared in the event of a real incident. Because there's no single technology that's going to stop all cyber attacks. I think we all know that. So it's really an approach of defense in depth, understanding your environment, your business, and how to mitigate those risks and enhance your resiliency overall.
And do you think that, organizations in the mining industry are well positioned to do this?
I think that's probably a question better for Rob. I'm just going to defer to him on this.
Yeah, all right.
I think it's a range, like everything. Generalizations are challenging because they're always wrong. I think because the mining industry really is spread across a smaller number of large, well-resourced companies. Think in the US, Newmont and Freeport McMoran as examples. Internationally, companies like BHP and Vale, very large, very big teams, well-resourced. But the vast majority of the work in mining is done by smaller companies, some of whom might have IT staffs of 5 or 6 people, let alone, no cybersecurity teams. A significant, proportion of, the resources needed for mining, come from developing nations, be them in Africa and otherwise, where for all kinds of reasons, IT and OT and security may not be emphasized as much as some, more pressing issues like safety and environmental sustainability may be bigger issues that are being focused on there in those regions for good reason. So it's really all over the map right now if we look at the industry as a whole.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Amal Ali because I know that you do some work in Congress. You work with people in Congress. So is there anything that you're seeing out of Congress that might tell us, the appetite of the congressmen and women or congresspeople about cybersecurity and dealing with African countries?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So there is definitely a lot more situational awareness in terms of the problems that we're facing in the global south. Some of the vulnerabilities that we're looking at that, that the Hill has become very aware of is that we have legacy systems, we have complex supply chains. So there's multiple nodes of vulnerability that we're looking at. And so this has risen from just a economic issue to a national security issue as well. So we're looking at potential solutions that include private sector solutions to look at, potentially integrating AI into this. So we're getting congressional support, we're getting congressional attention. So hopefully we're looking at potential funding for this cybersecurity issue that we're dealing with that is a national security issue. I mean, if we're looking at threats of these industries, I mean, this could have very mass impact on critical industries as well.
Thank you. And Rob, so, we're talking about, what the Congress is doing, what legislations that we expect to see. As someone who works for these organizations, what do you hope to see in, the public and private partnerships in enhancing cybersecurity in the sector?
I think there's a couple things. This is a tricky issue from a national public policy space in the US. When we look at other critical industries, the US can make policy decisions to have more manufacturing in the US, build more plants and encourage that. They can make policy decisions in a lot of other critical areas. Mining's not one where the US can say, well, we're just going to build more copper mines because the copper has to be there and it's not, right? Or we're just going to, build more palladium mines. Well, if the palladium's not there, it has to be it has to be done elsewhere. And so it's really a uniquely global problem that does map back to critical national security pieces for the US. Right down to defense industrial base or energy security, mining is critical to all of those things. And so it requires, as Amal said, a unique degree of cooperation with the private sector, and not just the private sector in the US, but a private sector globally. The US is a little bit late to that. We're working very heavily with governments in Canada, Australia, in Chile, and some other countries who are working on that. It's one of these things where unfortunately the US is a little bit late to working on this, but. So I think there needs to be a concerted effort to pile in and work on this together, but it has to be a global private sector led solution versus a domestic government led solution.
All right, thank you, Dylan. I was asking a question earlier about what's happening regarding legislation related to cybersecurity, and Rob just spoke to the fact that we need better public-private partnership, and that the US is a little bit behind. So we just wanted to see, or hear what you think is happening on the Hill. What are congresspeople talking about related to cybersecurity? And is there any legislation that we might expect to see in the next, few months or few years related to ensuring that mining companies can, be better with cybersecurity and national security?
Yeah, good question. So one big piece of legislation that I know Senator Duckworth has been working on is the Managing Active and Reserve Tech Talent Effectively Act, or MARTI Act. That was introduced earlier this year. Hopefully we can see it pass. Essentially what it does is it expand the cybersecurity roles that we currently have in our armed forces, both on the reserve side and the active component side, and expands that. And as we know, a lot of service members work hand in hand with a lot of partners here. For example, I'll transition to this, MXD in Chicago. If you're not familiar with it, highly recommend you check it out. Essentially what it is it's one of our think tanks that we have that's government sponsored, that focuses on manufacturing and digital. That's the MXD, located at Goose Island, downtown Chicago. They work with 300 or over 300 partners, any big names, whether it's Verizon or Boeing or any big company, to create innovation in our tech. And so since Chicago has such a big knack for cybersecurity and workforce development, as well as logistics, that's where they're headquartered. So it's a great defense innovation unit that takes these partners, brings these good ideas together, and works to better these companies. And they don't just take the big names too. They accept a lot of all the other smaller companies. So I know Senator Duckworth has promoted our defense innovation unit, as well as MXD and many other companies like that in Chicago. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. It's great to see that, we're making some progress, and also, making up for whatever, the way the US might have lagged behind over time. But now I'd like to go to Kevin. Since we're talking about what the United States might do to, make up for whatever lapses there are in cybersecurity, it'll be great to see if there's any successful policy or initiative from another industry or another country that can be applied to the US and metals and minerals sector.
Yeah, so coming in from the financial industry, I'll take an example from there. I think one of the most recent changes and focuses within the industry is really around operational resilience. So much different than your traditional business continuity planning, where you focus on an individual unit, you make sure that they understand their dependencies, and they map out, the technology, the people, the third parties, all of those things specific to them. When you're talking about operational resiliency, you're taking a global view at the enterprise. You're taking a look at the core service offerings. So if you're a bank, clearing and settlements, making payments, trading engines, things like that, if you can't do those things, you're no longer a bank. So money movement, things along those lines, key priorities for the organization. You're taking a look at those entire services, and you're mapping out, again, what makes it tick. The people, the process, the technology, the third parties, whatever it may be, critical infrastructure, and continuing to make sure that those things are being tracked, those things have been monitored, that you have redundancy in place that's necessary to keep information safe. I think data resiliency is a really key aspect of this moving forward, especially with ransomware is continuing to evolve, volume, velocity, impact. So that's the biggest change I've seen in the financial industry over the last few years, is really that focus on making sure that core service offerings are accessible regardless of impact.
Yeah, thank you. When we started the conversation, we kind of talked about how many mining industries are very small, have very few number of tech people on their teams, and which means that they may not have the resources to, like banks, to, take care of their cybersecurity. So do we expect that there are going to be tech companies that can help the small cybersecurity firms, the small mining firms take care of the cybersecurity, or do we expect the government to come in with some financing for that? Anyone can take that question.
I think I'll take it to start. I think there's a couple things building on what Kevin said. Resilience, organizational resilience, doesn't require cybersecurity expertise at all. It's a business problem. It requires understanding your business, and luckily even small mining companies have people understand mining. So it becomes a business problem, and it means you might be able to address your cybersecurity risk by changing your business practice versus a big investment in technology. For example, if you're worried your autonomous haulage system might get compromised and brought down, if you know that's going to take 2 or 3 weeks to build back up, you can make a business process change to say, we're going to maintain an ore stockpile of a month. We're going to build up that stockpile, and now we can maintain organizational resilience through that and we don't have to make a big cybersecurity investment. All we need is real estate to stockpile some additional ore, and luckily mines often have lots of that. So we've got a whole lot of options. I think the place for the industry to start is, shamelessly say, peer organizations like MM-ISAC allow not only the sharing of intelligence, but the sharing of people and capability. So not every small mining company needs to have every capability and every person. They can share a person amongst themselves or share that capability amongst themselves, which then makes it affordable and possible to do versus a large miner that might have 5 or 6 of every needed role, right? A small miner then could share one person across 4 or 5 mining companies. That becomes a lot more doable and effective that way.
Thank you. I remember that about a year or two ago, we had several incidents of companies. They might have been mining companies or not, but when they had some security threats, they received some funding from the government to help them, get back on track. And I wonder what your opinion is with, get allocating federal funds or incentives to bolster cybersecurity in the metal and minerals industry. Do we expect to see more of that?
Hi, yes. So I wanted to bring up CISA, if you're not familiar, that's the newest agency within the Department of Homeland Security. They focus on cybersecurity and infrastructure. I'm sure you all are very familiar with them, but they have been expanding and they have a Chicago office. What they want to do is lead, become the leaders in that field for companies. So if you say, I'm a company that is struggling, that's been hit with cyber attacks, I need some assistance, I need training. They're there to provide that training. They can bring in experts and they're available. They're local, whether it's an online class or they can come in and examine your hardware. So I would just, look to them for advice, as they are the leading government agency and the newest one within the DHS.
Thank you. When I know that you work with companies in Africa, what is it like for them? What is their appetite towards, getting resources from the United States? Is there a specific type of support that they're asking from the United States to help with their cybersecurity infrastructure?
Yeah, it really actually comes down to updated technology. The technology there is very dated. It's also extremely vulnerable, as we've discussed previously, but also physical security is kind of an issue. In a lot of countries, there's specific countries, for instance, that we just do not operate in, despite many, many requests for us to support, which is the DRC, unfortunately, due to safety considerations there. So what's actually also really interesting is I'm actually in conversation with CISA. It's a great agency. It's very innovative. So they do work internationally as well. From what I recall, I think they just signed an agreement to work with our Republic of Korea for exchange of security practices. So that's one thing that I'm looking to facilitate, is getting U.S. agency public support to these ventures down in the global south, specifically in Western Africa, which is where I operate primarily out of, and maybe getting that American support there to facilitate a little bit more of a secure environment to encourage more U.S. companies to invest in those industries down there.
Thank you. So, Kevin, what role do public awareness and education play in this issue that we're talking about today? At UChicago and Harris, what do we need to be talking about to help, help this industry be better when it comes to security?
Yeah, I think that's obviously a component, of ensuring that critical infrastructure remains resilient, remains cyber safe. But I think to me, it is really the ownership is with the organization and with the industry, because they're the ones that are accountable ultimately for delivering of the service. It's not the public, and I think the public is obviously a component of that. They need to be diligent in their activities, but it's really not something that you can affect. The public can truly affect, in my opinion. It really just comes back to making sure that the industry, the third, fourth parties, first party players, are all following good security practices. They all have an understanding of their importance to the industry. They're following the regulatory guidance. I think there are hopefully frameworks, and again, I'm not as familiar in the mining industry as I am in the financial industry, but speaking from the financial industry, there are very specific frameworks that have to be adhered to and things along those lines. So I really don't look at it as a public awareness, situation, but I'm happy to be debated on that.
Thank you. Rob, I know that your organization formed out of an incident that happened, and you talked in the podcast about, the dangerous this kind of risk can be, because when there's a cybersecurity threat and the companies are not ready for it, they have to shut down their operation. And if we continue to see things like this, it will slow down the transition that we're seeing in technology right now. So can you speak a little bit to that incident that happened that, motivated you to start the organization, but also, why is this such a threat that we need to pay attention to?
Yeah, I think when we think about it, where the Money Mills ISAC started from is a series of cyber attacks that hit Canadian miners. The same people got 8 mining companies in about 4.5 months, ranging from small ones to large ones. And as we got together as an industry to look at that, we kind of realized that somewhere between number 1 and number 8, it stopped being shame on them and started being shame on us for enabling that to happen. And the reason that happens is because we don't share information, we don't collaborate, and we don't work together. The success of doing that since then, if we look at this past year, a small copper miner in Canada was affected, and unfortunately for them, they had to take a 3-week shutdown because they couldn't guarantee the safety of their operations. So in mining being a very high-risk environment, if you can't guarantee the safety of your operational systems, your only option is to turn it off and to shut down. If you can't be assured it's safe, because if you think about it, right, mining's a dangerous business, right? You're in some cases kilometers underground, dealing with explosives and machinery, and there's all kinds of ways to get yourself killed at a mine. So the technology has to be safe and reliable, otherwise you have to shut it down. Those same actors in August attacked a large US copper miner. But because through the ISAC we're sharing the information, that US miner suffered no downtime, right? And we're able to deal with that attack fairly effectively because we're sharing that information. And doing that across international boundaries, regardless of if the company being attacked is in Canada, the US, Western Africa, or Australia, is a critical function to doing that. So, from a policy perspective, I think there's 2 big things. I think that the number 1 is the US needs to start naming mining as a critical infrastructure sector. Right now, mining is not. Portions of it are, that being thermal coal and uranium are energy. But beyond that, mining isn't one of the listed critical infrastructure sectors, which inhibits the involvement from CISA and some other agencies from a focus perspective. And the second is we have to look at how we share intelligence and threat information globally. And so that's things like, how does CISA and the US government declassify to enable sharing of information? Is that happening fast enough? Right? How does that word get out to the industry globally? And I think that's an area that the US has the ability to show some leadership in, and I think it's important that it does.
All right. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to open up to the audience. If you have any questions, we have a few minutes to take questions.
Yeah, hi guys. So just open to anybody who's most comfortable answering it. But there's this catchphrase called resilient supply chains, which has gained a lot of traction after 2020 and post-COVID. Now, I would understand what a resilient supply chain means in terms of, normal trade supply chains, global value chains. But in terms of mining, where you have very limited set of producers, what do you mean by a resilient supply chain in mining, or wherever it proceeds to?
I guess I'll start with that, but a resilient supply chain in mining is 2 things. Is while number 1, mining companies themselves have to be resilient to create a resilient global supply chain, because of the start. mining companies as well depend on supply chain partners to produce, whether that be diesel for the trucks and its related supply chains, or reagent chemicals for the processing plants, or mining equipment. Mining has its own supply chain as well. And in order for, obviously software and technology and all those other things that go into a mine, into mining. So mining's got the same resilient supply chain as any other issues as any other industry, be it, manufacturing or anything else. But that's compounded by them needing to be resilient themselves to feed their own supply chain. If you think Caterpillar, who makes trucks, is a part of the mining supply chain, but the beginning of Caterpillar's supply chain is the very mine they're supplying the trucks to. Right? So there's actually a bit of a circular nature to the mining supply chain that is unique, I think, compared to other industries.
Thank you.
So this is probably a bit more directed at Rob, but given kind of the very national, security or focused on governments in terms of thinking that rare earth minerals and resources like that are like a national priority. How does that factor into the kind of insurance and financial risk analysis side? For example, there was a case, I believe, pretty recently where their insurer tried to get out of it by saying that the cyber attack was an act of war. And while the insurer did lose, once these companies are more, embedded either with how they operate in relation to governments and stuff, how does that risk kind of factor in?
That's an interesting actually transition we're in certain sectors. Setting aside the fact that shockingly an insurance company is trying to avoid paying out on a claim, which is that's just what they do. Their argument's actually developing some merit. We're seeing in the US DoD beginning to invest in lithium and other critical material miners, not just in the US, but in Canada and other countries. So, if DoD is investing, does that make it now defense industrial base, not mining? Right? And how does that change from a risk perspective? I think ultimately as a miner, do I have to be aware of that? Yes. Does it change what I do day to day? No. The risks are the same, even though you might be drawing attention from different threat actors, and the need to be resilient doesn't change. If I can be resilient to outage or attack, does it matter if that attack came from a ransomware operator in North Korea or Chinese intelligence? Probably not. Right? It still becomes that overall intelligence. So it's number one, that might affect how we do insurance and how we do risk transference. But from the day-to-day, how do we secure the operations and how do we build resilience? You don't want to get too hung up on that because it could lead you down the wrong path.
Yeah, I wonder if Kevin has any thoughts, given your many years of experience in the financial industry.
Yeah, I think, my experience, and I've done some math and risk analysis past, actually calculating, true impacts of what cyber attacks would be to the bank that I work for. And insurance is a speed bump. It's a small little component of your risk reduction at scale. Because you may, let's say, feel good about having your $300 million policy or $500 million policy, which may or may not be paid out due to different limitations or constraints within the policy. But you're talking about $1 billion loss. If the wrong things get compromised, multiple $1 billion loss, and those things include not just your remediation, not just your reputational harm. So credit monitoring, people don't think about $15 per month per person for 3 years. That up over, let's say, 10% of the people that were impacted, let's say 10 million records or 10 million people. That's, just an unfathomable loss to some people. But when you actually take a look at it, that's a realistic possibility. So, cyber insurance is certainly a component of risk mitigation, but as Rob said, your best defense is really being proactive and managing your risks And don't really change that because you have a higher policy limit. That doesn't really, to me, make that much sense.
And the other one I'll add to Kevin's point, in mining, we're actually dealing with people and people working in a dangerous environment. So, looking at insurance that covers the financial loss, ultimately the mining company, might lose some money. Ultimately, they still got an operation. It's going to affect them for a few quarters. Their CISO goes to the board and goes, "Oh, sorry, my bad." He might get fired. He might lose his bonus. Things might happen. However, you don't get to go to somebody's funeral and go, "My bad," to their widow, right? So, cybersecurity errors in mining and a lack of resilience can lead to loss of life. It can lead to massive environmental damage. We've seen the impacts in Brazil when tailings dams fail and wipe out villages, right? That wasn't a cyber incident. However, if your tailings monitoring, which is in the case of a lot of it, is driven by technology, which it is, you could miss the signs of those sorts of failures developing if you haven't built them to be resilient. And so those are the kind of impacts we're looking at. And it goes beyond, if my biggest problem was my insurance company saying no, I'd be pretty happy with where I was sitting, right? It's the impacts are very real from an environmental, from a loss of life impact. And those have to be top of mind for this industry.
All right, thank you so much. We've now come to the end of the session. I want to thank Rob, Kevin, Amal, and Dylan for coming here today. It's, really appreciate it because, again, the mining industry is something that's like an afterthought for a lot of young people. So getting experts from the industry, give us, tell us what's happening and, give us some insights about what we might expect in the coming years. It's, very thoughtful of you guys. So we hope that, if we send you requests on LinkedIn, you accept, because there are a few of us who would love to, talk to you more, and, learn more about the work that you do. So thank you everyone for coming here today. Again, we really appreciate your presence. I am a part of Youth Hub. It's a U3CP podcast, and we talk about these issues. We have an episode every week, so hopefully you can check us out. So thank you everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And that wraps up our event for today. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We look forward to seeing you next time in our final episode of the quarter as we wrap up. If you have any questions, if you ever want to comment on or discuss with us what we talk about on the podcast, please drop us a line, uc3p@gmail.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.